At the time of this story, I was 14, and I had developed crippling anxiety and depression. All I'll say is that I was, and still am, very vigilant about my surroundings. On this day, I had planned to stay the night at a friend's house. I had never stayed at her place before. It was always mine. For you to understand this story, I need to explain the layout of this house. It was located on a sloped hill, and when you drove down a steep road, the first part of the house you would see was big and expansive, resembling an old mansion. If you continued driving down, you would be met with two semi-separated buildings. Both were small and run down. When I say small, I mean one of them was just a bedroom, and the other was a bedroom with a small bathroom and kitchen. There were no doors inside, just a piece of cloth or beads to separate the bathroom entrance from the kitchen. My friend's room was the bedroom, and her mom lived in the other section with the bathroom and kitchen. The landlord of the property lived in the main house, the big mansion. It was located in the middle of the woods, and when I say that, I don't mean it lightly. I mean all you could see was expansive Australian forest. Australian rainforests are incredibly dense, and if you tried to walk through, you would most likely receive some type of bite, whether that be a spider, ant, leech, etc. I'll cut to the first thing that happened. My friend and I had walked into her mom's flat and called out for her mom. She was in the bathroom, and as we walked past a small window, I heard, "Yeah?" coming from outside. I turned to my friend, and she looked at me the same way I was. We were so confused. If her mom was in the bathroom that was right in front of us, why did we hear a male voice coming from right outside? We brushed this off as not to scare ourselves and continued having fun in my friend's room. For a little more context, the landlord used half of her room as storage and blocked off the back section of the room with a tall shelf and a divider. There was a huge glass sliding door at the front of her room, and in the blocked-off back section, there was another door. You couldn't get to that door unless you squeezed through a section outside. Now, skipping forward a little to nighttime. My friend and I had to go to the bathroom, so we slinked out of her room and walked to her mom's flat. Her mom was fast asleep. We used the bathroom as quietly as possible, and then exited. As we were making the small walk back to my friend's room, we saw something out in the woods. A pair of eyes, looking directly at us from behind a tree. We panicked and froze. I pulled out my phone and took a photo before we sprinted back into her room, locking the glass door behind us and drawing the curtains. It's not a reach to say we were already freaking out. We looked at the photo, and sure enough, when I brightened the image, there was what looked to be a man staring at us from the dark woods. We were extremely scared, but I called my mother, who was about an hour away, and she dismissed us. After that, we were still scared, but it was a little comforting. After a while, we relaxed and chalked it up to our imagination playing tricks on us. We pulled out my laptop and put on a movie. I forget which movie, but it was some cheesy rom-com. Maybe 20 minutes into the movie, we froze and paused it. Footsteps. Footsteps crunching on the dry leaves right outside her room. We listened in horror as the footsteps moved through the tight alley that led to the back door. We both moved slowly, standing on the bed to look over the room divider. Our eyes were locked on the back door, and after a moment of complete silence, it turned. The doorknob wiggled slowly before it became faster. The door couldn't be opened as it was jammed against objects that were in storage. Then it stopped. No more noise. We were crying, holding each other in our arms, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Then the footsteps slowly crunched off the leaves in the opposite direction, back to the front of her room. We both didn't hesitate now, and I reached for my phone. We called the police, and after trying to explain the situation to the operator on the other end, in tears the whole time, she told us a unit was being dispatched and to stay where we were. Then, as we were still crying and hyperventilating, we heard a phone ringing. It sounded like an old landline phone, one with the harsh and loud beeping. It was coming from the landlord's mansion. We waited silently, listening to the drawn-out ringing of his phone. After what felt like at least 2 minutes, it stopped, and we heard his voice as he talked to the operator. At this time, we both noticed another thing: fingerprints on her window. These windows were slatted glass that you could open up and shut with a lever. Whoever left these prints reached up, cupped their hand around the top of the glass, and dragged their fingers on the dust. It wasn't there before. Soon the landlord walked to her mother's unit and told her that the police called him. He seemed extremely upset and told her that he made sure they didn't send a unit. Her mother came to her room and we explained the situation. Both the landlord and her mother didn't seem too bothered by the fact that a man just tried to enter our room. I couldn't stay the night and neither could my friend. We were too scared to spend another minute there. I called my mom and she came to get us at about 12 p.m. We dropped my friend back the next day, and when we got there, her mother told us something that I don't think I can pass up as a coincidence. The night it happened, it was raining, and there was strong wind, but nothing strong enough to do this. Next to her mother's unit, she had a pole that held beads and fairy lights. During the night, right after me and her were picked up, it had been knocked down. Keep in mind, this pole was literally embedded into the cement and tied to other items with zip ties. There is no way that could have been the wind. That pole was sturdy. I still am unsure of an explanation for all of this. It may have been her landlord. I'm not too sure. It could have also been her ex-stepfather, who was pretty insane. Hello, my name is Alex, and here's my story. At the time, I was in my old bedroom, which was basically one of the smallest rooms in the house. I am now in a new bedroom, this one way more spacious. My bedroom was about 5 by 5 meters, and it could only fit a bed, 2 nightstands, and a dresser with a mirror screwed on top. It was in the basement. Now, most of you guys probably think a basement is dark, creepy, and eerie, but mine was not. My parents made sure to make it as full of life as possible. They painted the walls, installed a gaming room, which I used often, and basically made it really cool if someone in our family wanted to have a party there. Now, the room I had, I think it was actually fair that I had that one room because before we moved houses, both of my brothers had to sleep in a tiny bedroom, about 5 square feet large, basically the worst, and I had the biggest room in the whole house. So at that time we had 3 cats. One died later on after what I had lived, but that's not really relevant to the story. One of the 3 was my favorite. I loved her and took care of her, and she made sure I wasn't depressed. Sometimes, we would just let her go outside during the night, and I would let her go in sometime when she scratched on my window. She still does it to this day. I was an insomniac, and I never slept well. My parents knew about it, so they decided to get some melatonin pills to help me sleep. My window was on the top of my bedroom's wall, which meant my cat didn't need to hop on any type of ledge or border to scratch with her paws on it from the outside, letting me know that she wanted to get in. It was a night that I decided to take some melatonin pills, which worked fantastically when I couldn't sleep. And so I was literally about to sleep, like I was on the edge of dreaming, and I heard my cat scratch, or so I thought. I sighed and got up to move my curtains out of the way so I could let her in, but when I opened my window, I heard something move or step on the rocks that were around my window. At that time, I was too sleepy to realize that it wasn't a cat's footsteps that I heard, but a human's. So, as a normal person, I yelled my cat's name and put my hand out of the window to tap on the ground, as such to let my cat know that she could come to get in. That was my mistake. In no time, I heard footsteps coming straight to the window, and I felt a man's hand grab my arm and start to pull me out of my window. I started screaming for someone to come and help me, but nobody came. I felt the adrenaline instantly rush to my body and quickly grabbed a sharp object. I believe it was a dirty knife covered in old food, and stabbed the guy's hand. Blood dripped out of it as I heard a blood-curdling scream, the scream I would remember my whole life. The man quickly ran away as fast as he could, and I fell back on my bed, opening my door and running as fast as I could upstairs to my parents' bedroom to tell them the horror story I just lived. They woke up fast and called the cops, reassuring me that I was safe and everything, caring for my horrible wound from the man's grip on my arm. They arrived at the house, and I told them what happened. I was still under adrenaline, my words not sounding very clear. With the man's blood that was on the knife, they managed to get his name and where he lived. They followed up on us and told us that he got arrested for attempted kidnapping, and that he already got charged with many other crimes before. I am still traumatized to this day. This happened a long time ago. I was a petite and small girl, only about 18 or 19 years old, and I worked at a junior food store in Kentucky. There were a couple of incidents that happened to me in the short time I worked there. I have several other stories, but those are for another time. The store was somewhat isolated, and I was left all alone for most of my shifts. My manager, who happened to be married, and another employee who happened to be my manager's best friend, would leave to meet with their boyfriends. Some of my duties consisted of sweeping the parking lot and measuring the gas after closing at midnight. I hated doing this by myself. There weren't any other businesses open anywhere close to me. This was back around 1984, so of course there were no cell phones. I was very naive at the time. One night I received a phone call from a man asking if we had any Playboy magazines. I informed him that yes, we do have Playboy and a few other magazines. He asked me who was the centerfold in the Playboy. The phone I was using was a cordless phone at the time. I politely told him to wait just a minute. I looked in the magazine and told him the name of the model. He then asked me if her private area looked juicy. I froze and hung up on him. Thank goodness he didn't call back. It scared me so bad, and I really felt like an idiot for even looking the centerfold up for him. The second incident was a lot scarier than the previous one. When I was hired, I had been instructed to call the police if anyone stayed out in the parking lot for more than 15 minutes. There weren't many people that came into the store after dark, and that night I was scared for my life. It was no different. I had completed my duties at the time, and I was just waiting until I could close the door and go home. A man pulled up right in front of the door in a light-colored car. I have never been able to distinguish the make and model of any car. I waited for him to come in, happy that someone would break the silence of my shift. I could see him as I stood by the cash register. He was leaning over, looking at himself in the rearview mirror. He continually wiped his face with his hands. I couldn't see anything on him from where I was standing. I immediately got a really bad feeling about what he was doing. When he had pulled up, I had glanced at the clock, and time crept by as I watched him wipe his face over and over. I waited 15 minutes and then called 911 and told the dispatcher about the situation. In no time, 2 police cars pulled up and confronted the man. I watched them handcuff him but didn't see anything else due to the fact another customer came in to buy some gas. It seemed like forever before one of the officers came in to thank me for calling them and to ask if I was okay. What he told me next made a shiver run through me, and my blood ran cold. He informed me that the man had been wiping blood off his face and there was a huge butcher-type knife with the handle broken off, and it was covered with blood as well. He said the man appeared intoxicated, and since his car was running, they arrested him for driving under the influence. The officer added that they had contacted his family and everyone appeared okay. He added that they didn't know whose blood it was, but they would continue to investigate to see if they could find someone that he had apparently hurt or killed. I never heard anything in regards to the case. I realized that anything could have happened to me that night, and I quit shortly afterwards. Back in 2018, I was 17 years old at the time, living in foster care. The group home was situated on a busy street. Despite being in the city, we had a backyard with a basketball court, picnic table, and some grass at the very back. The whole backyard was surrounded by 2-meter-tall chain-link fences. There were houses to the right and left of ours. At the very back of the yard, on the other side of the fence, there was a public walking and biking path that stretched at least 12 kilometers. This path would take you through a huge park along the water, to the beach, etc. It's a very popular area for people to visit. I was a regular cannabis smoker, although I was always very well put together for a teenager. The group home workers agreed to turn a blind eye to me as long as I didn't make it obvious. So on weekend mornings, I'd go for a walk to the park behind the house. I'd roll up on a park bench and smoke. One day everything changed. It was a weekend morning as usual at 7 a.m. I made my way to my favorite park bench. I'm sitting there, with my joint in my hands. It was quite windy, and it kept going out. Facing the water, about 100 meters of field between the waterfront and I noticed a man stomping through the field heading straight for me. He didn't seem like he was on a leisurely walk at all. I remember thinking to myself, why is he not using the paved path? Why does it seem like he's walking straight towards me? What is he holding? Is anybody else around? Panic ensued. He was holding something chunky in one of his hands. I looked around for someone and noticed an elderly woman walking from the direction of the group home. She was about 20 meters away from me. I speed walked towards the woman. By the time I got to her, the man had made it to the bench I was sitting on. The woman kept walking towards the bench and I in the opposite direction. For a moment I looked back to make sure the man wasn't following me, or worse. I saw the man lay his brick down on a pile of rocks behind the bench. The woman stopped walking. I'm guessing she had processed something peculiar. Thankfully, the man kept moving straight towards the boulevard and was not seen in the park. The woman then turned around, and she looked at me with this shocked stare in her eyes. I remember feeling reassured. We both continued on with our days without saying a single word. Later that same day, around 9 p.m., people aren't allowed to smoke within 10 meters of an entry to an establishment, and there was only one light in the backyard, above the entry to the establishment. So this girl in my group home goes out for a smoke in the backyard. No lights. Like 3 minutes later, she's banging on the door yelling and I let her in. She's freaking out and we're trying to get answers out of her. Then she explains, there was a man. He stood there on the path. She watched and stared, taking pulls off her cigarette. The man then starts walking towards her and starts climbing the fence. That's when I shared my story from that same morning. To be honest, I thought I was being paranoid at first, but when someone tried to hop the fence, I believe it was the same man. The workers on shift that night called the police, and the police started patrolling the path at night. The group home added some garden lights in the back. I hope this piece of shit never lays hands on anyone.